Chapter 1, The Birchbark House. She was named Omakayas, or Little Frog, because her first step was a hop. She grew into a nimble young girl of 7 winters, a thoughtful girl with a shining brown eyes and a wide grin, only missing her 2 top front teeth. She touched her upper lip. She still wasn't used to those teeth gone, and was impatient for new grown-up teeth to complete her smile. Just like her namesake, Omakayas now stared long at the silly patch of bog before she gathered herself and jumped. One hummock. Safety. Omakayas sprang wide again, this time landed on the very top of a pointed old stump. She bounced there, looking all around. The lagoon water moved in sparkling crescents. Thick swells of swamp grass rippled. Mud turtles napped in the sun. The world was so calm that Omakayas could hear herself blink. Only the sweet call of solitary white-throated sparrow pierced the cool of the woods beyond. All of a sudden, Grandma yelled, "I found it!" Startled, Omakaya slipped and spun her arms and wheels. She teetered, but somehow kept her balance. 2 big, skipping hops, another leap, and she was on dry land. She stepped over spongy leaves and moss into the woods where the sparrows sang nestling songs and delicate relays. "Where are you?" Nokomis yelled again. "I found the tree." "I'm coming," Omakayas called back to her grandmother. It was springtime to cut the birch bark. All winter long, Omakayas' family lived in a cabin of sweet-scented cedar at the edge of the village of Lake La Pointe, on an island in Lake Superior that had her people calling Muniwanai Island of the golden-breasted woodpecker. As soon as the earth warmed, the birchbark house always took shape under Nokomis's swift hands. Now the damping light of tiny new leaves moved on Grandma's beautiful, softly lined skin. In one hand she waved her sharp knife, taken from the beaded pouch of her hip. In the other hand she held tobacco. Nokomis was ready to make an offering to the spirits, or manitius. They loved tobacco. Omakayas banged the tree her grandmother had found. "Yes, here it is, this one." Omakayas was skinny, weary, and tough for 7 winters. She slammed the trunk of her birch with a big rotten stick. Splinters of soft wood flew. "Bonnie!" Nokomis scolded. "Leave it alone." She walked up to the tree and put her leathery, paw-like hands on smooth bark, feeling for flaws. "Yes," she decided, her eyes sparkling at her granddaughter. "A good one. Is it ready?" "Gegit," said Nokomis. "Surely." Nokomis' tobacco pouch was decorated with blue and white beads in the shape of a pipe. She had owned this tobacco bag ever since Omakayas could remember. When she talked to the mantios, Nokomis dipped out a pinch of tobacco. "Oh, sister," she said to the birch bark tree, "we need your skin for our shelter." At the base of the tree, Nokomis left her offering sweet and fragrant. Then she peered closely, deciding where to make the first cut. Suddenly, she pressed her razor-sharp knife into the bark. Omakayas stepped back, light filtered golden and green onto their faces. Tiny white flowers poked out of dead leaves. There were still traces of grainy old snowbanks in the shadiest spots, but in places the sun was actually hot. Pow! As soon as Grandmother made the proper cuts to the birch bark, filled with spring water, nearly burst out from the tree. Omakayas helped her grandmother carefully push the bark aside. Then the two peeled it away strip by strip. She and Omakayas carried the light, papery, pink-brown rolls of the woods down a trail to a special place near the water. Here they set up Birchbark House. Damp ground made Nokomis' old bones ache, so she spread out her brown cattail mat and sat down there to sew the pieces of bark together. Omakayas helped her, threading the tough basswood strands through holes punched by Grandma's awl. Meanwhile, Mama and Omakaya's older sister tied together a frame of bent willow poles. Finally, as the light faded, they fastened the mats of bark onto the willow frame. A half skeleton of pliable saplings, the bark mat overlapping like shingles to shed the rain. Each one was secured to the next so as not to blow off in a storm. When the house was swept out, smooth, fussily arranged, and admired, they moved in. The children, Omakaya's brother, Little Pinch, baby Neo, Omakaya's older sister, Pretty Angeline, and Omakaya's herself, spread the blankets around the stone fire pit. Mama and Nokomis hung the smoky woven bags of rice and tools and medicines from the willow poles above. Omakaya's family were Anishinabeg, and this was their island. Her father, her Day, was the fur trade business, which meant he was often gone, paddling the great canoes for the fur company or sometimes trapping animals himself. Yellow Kettle, her mother, was quick-tempered and always laughing, and her eyes shrewdly took in the world. Yellow Kettle was a strong-looking woman and beautiful. Her smile was generous. Enigmatic, slightly crooked, and kind. She missed nothing when it came to her children. It was possible to hide a half-done job ridiculous, even to think of sneaking away in the morning before gathering wood for fire and water for her cooking pot. And if Mama didn't notice her younger children's whereabouts, Omakaya's older sister Angeline surely would. Angeline was smart and so pretty people would turn their tracks to stare at her. Her hair was thick and her hands were clever. The beads in her designs were laid in strict rows. Her stitches never faltered. Her steps when she walked or danced were clear and graceful. She was so perfect that Omakaya despaired. Still, she hoped that she herself would turn out like Angeline, and was sometimes embarrassed to find herself following at Angeline's heels like a puppy. Most of the time, Angeline was kind to Omakaya's and let her tag along and admire from a distance. But there were also times her words were sharp as bee stings. And those times, Omakaya shedded tears her sister never knew or probably cared about. For as very beautiful people sometimes are, Angeline could be just a little cold-hearted at times. Omakaya's older little brother, Pinch, was the only really big problem in her life. The sad truth was, and she couldn't tell this to a single person, Omakaya didn't like Little Pinch. She thought there was something wrong with him. So greedy, so loud. But although his ways were mischievous and bold, Pinch loved his mother deeply, and he clung to her side. In fact, he took up all of her attention even more than the baby. He clutched Mama's skirts with fat, little, tough fingers. He yelled at Omakaya if she was slow in giving up her willow doll, her little rock people, or anything else for the matter, including food, special pieces of driftwood she found, even her favorite sleeping place near Grandma. He thought he deserved everything. At least when it came to Neo, there was nothing to complain about. He was so sweet that Omakaya even often pretended that he was her very own baby. Of course, she hardly ever got to hold him, for he was still very young. Still, she was sure he preferred her to Angeline and certainly to Pinch. Sometimes, he even held his arms out to her when his mama was holding him and yelled with delight when Omakaya picked him up. As it grew dark, the family ate muckucks of moose stew and fresh greens and berries, licked their fingers and bowls clean, and the last rolled themselves into warm, fluffy rabbit skin blankets that still smelled of cedary smoke of their winter cabin. They were glad to be close to fire, sleeping on soft grassy earth underneath leafy sky, and best of all, near water. They fell asleep to the peaceful, curious, continual lapping sounds of waves. The fresh wind across the big lake blew away, and smoke of cooking fires and vanquished the mosquitoes that came out in whining droves and had plagued them in town. It was good to sleep where the village dogs didn't bark all night, and were the only sound to disturb their dreams was the pine trees sifting wind and the luring roar. Unless, of course, it stormed. The moon went down to the fingernails silver and corn popped from the ground. The leaves of the birch grew big enough to flutter in the wind. And then one night, the first storm of the summer struck the island and startled everybody from their dreams. The fire was down to red winking eyes when Omakayas woke with an uneasy feeling. Something approached. She'd felt a footstep. Omakayas was always the one to sleep near Grandma, and now she rode close. There was a lonely instant to the sound of the wind, and then everything went still. Far off, she heard one huge footstep. There was a long silence. Then another step fell. The earth shook slightly beneath her, vibrant, as though she lay on her head of a vast drum. A drum! She remembered that Grandma had said the island was a drum of thunder beings. Closer and closer they came, shaking earth with their footsteps. Omakaya's lonely feeling became fright. She hid her face and tried not to think of balls of witch fire or the hooting of Grandfather Owl. She tried to keep herself from picturing pakunks, the skeletons of little children, flying through the woods, or the icy breath of giant wendigos striding over the ground, cracking trees off with every foot crunch. Another step, another, and another fell, and then the wind howled to life. Rain slashed against the tightly sewn walls. A breath of air stirred the slumbering coils and cast shadows leaping and the fighting on the inside of the little Birchbark house. The willow poles trembled, bouncing with the force of the gust of wind. The birchbark scraped the flapping, but was held on with tight stitches. Omakayas hid her face as thunder roared, smacking onto the lakeshore, waking everything and everyone with its quick violence. The storm pushed the ground and then passed over, dying off in softer mumbles. The dull thuds of thunder falling in the distance now felt comforting, and before the sounds entirely faded, Omakayas was asleep. Monowanakaing, island of the golden-breasted woodpecker, sparkled innocently after the night of the raw thunder and lightning. Omakayas woke and immediately began wondering, what had the storm done to the trees? What had the waves washed onto the beach? What interesting bits of wood that she could use for pretend dolls? What kind of day would it be? Were the little berries on the edge of the path ripe yet? An unpleasant piece of wandering came to her, too. Had her mother finished scraping and tanning the ugly moose hide, or would she have to help her? Oh, she hoped not. How she hoped. There was a saying she hated. Grandma said it often, too. Each animal, she would say, has just enough brains to tan its own hide. Mama tanned the moose hide with the very brains of the moose, and Omakayas hated the oozy feel of them on her hands. Not to mention the boring, endless scraping and rubbing that went into making a hide soft enough for moccasins. From a fire in the center of the Birchbark house, a thin curl of smoke rose, then vanished through the crescent of sunlight in the roof. If only she could escape with smoke. She could already hear Mama and Grandma outside the cooking fires. They were planning a day's work. In no time at all, the soaking moose hide would be stretched on the branch frame, and she would be required to scrape it at it with a sharpened deer shoulder bone that her mother kept in a bundle of useful things near the door. Her arms would tire, they would feel like falling off, her fingers would go numb, her back would hurt, the awful smell would get into her skin, and meanwhile, all the little birds would find a luscious patch of berries. She alone knew about it. By the time she got to that stupid old moose hide softening up, they would have eaten every last berry. She must act quickly. The air was fresh, delicious, smelling of new leaves in the woods, just popped out mushrooms and pelts of young deer. The air flowed in, rain-washed, under the stripes of birch bark walls she had helped sew together yesterday. Like a small striped snake, like a salamander or a squirrel, maybe a raccoon. Something quick, little, harmless, and desperate. She slid, crept, wiggled underneath the side of the summer house. The seam of bark caught her in the small of the back, stuck tight. If only she hadn't done such a good job sewing it up. If only, too, Angeline didn't have such quick ears and sure knowledge of her whereabouts at all times. There is a firm pressure suddenly at a small of her back. Still caught on the inside. Her sister's foot, her sister's gloating voice. Nishame, baby sister, little frog, don't go jumping off. Then there was her mother, rounding the back of the house, one side of her hair still flowing down unbraided. They glanced in surprise at Omakaya's trapped and then unable to hide her amusement. A big grin spread over Mama's face. Her admiring her big sister, her beloved mother laughing. There was Omakaya's laughing from the front and laughter from behind. And suddenly, all of last night's thunder in her heart. Omakaya sat near the cooking fire and slowly, with deep inner fury, ate a bowl of cold stew. She dragged out time, waiting for her handful's job to start. Mama was wrestling that hide out of the stream now, where it had been soaking for days and nights, gathering up its scummy, rolling slime. Mama had already set up the dreadful frame of branches, and there were strings of hide nearby that she would use to tie the skin up tight so that it could be worked. Omakayas knew how it was to tan the skin, how her mother would cut up the soft smoke hide and sew on the winter's moccasins all summer. She pictured the mother finishing them with lovely soft toe puckers so the girls' feet could twitch and dance. She could imagine Yellow Kettle beating them, lining them inside the silkiest rabbit fur and pieces of an old wool blanket. Yes, it is what's important task, but Omakaya still didn't want it. She finished her stew, cleaning her bowl out with sand at the shore of the lake, and waited for a sigh for her mother to ask for her to fetch her dear bone scraper. Her mother said something else, though. I need my scissors. Omakaya sat up, suddenly full of energy. Omakaya's mother was well known for owning a pair of scissors, and other women were always borrowing them. Omakaya's first job ever since she could walk was to fetch her mother's scissors, kept safe from her small fingers in a beaded woven case, and bring them home. She had never failed, for it was a job she liked not only because she was sometimes given a handful of monomum rice or a little chunk of maple sugar by the borrowing lady, but because there were things to see on the way there and back. Right now, her sister, Angeline, was digging at the ground near spruce trees and cutting lengths of roots used to secure the house better to finish the baskets. She was cheerful, humming at her work, glad to have gotten the better of Omakaya's. She'd shown Angeline, let her work until her hands fall off. Omakaya's had a fun job to do. Go fetch me the scissors from old Talo, said Omakaya's mother. Without a moment's hesitation, before Mama changed her mind and remembered about the help she needed with the stinky hide, Omakayas ran off.